How many of you support the position of the Biden administration on Israel and Gaza? Please raise your hand. How many people do not support it? You know, Mr. President, we, as we all know, are in campaign season. And I would say to Speaker Johnson that when you attend your fundraising dinners with your billionaire friends and you eat your fine steaks and your lobsters and your other wonderful food, please remember these pictures from Gaza. This is a photograph of a child in Gaza taken by Getty. This is a photograph of a child and his or her mother taken by Reuters, and one doubts very much whether that child is alive today. This is a photograph taken by Al Jazeera. This is another photograph taken by Getty of a child who I can't imagine is alive today. These children and thousands more are the direct result of Netanyahu's policies. Netanyahu, the man Speaker Johnson has invited to address Congress. No, Mr. President, I will not be in attendance for that speech. Every one of Gaza's 12 universities has been bombed. Got that? Every one of the 12 universities in Gaza has been bombed. More than 400 schools have suffered direct hits, and 56 schools have been totally destroyed. Today, 625 children in Gaza have no access to education at all. And I'll tell you something else. When you talk about what's going on in Gaza, what is not talked about almost at all, I think I read one article on this, I want you to think about the psychic damage done to children. The children who see housing being destroyed, their parents or relatives being killed, see drones flying around them, some of which have guns, being pushed out of their homes, deafening noise, inadequate food, inadequate water, pushed, shoved into any place and every place. What kind of psychic damage? If there's one child in Gaza that does not suffer psychic damage from this horror, I will be very surprised. Now, Mr. Netanyahu's been on TV today and elsewhere. He denies it all. Ain't true, says Mr. Netanyahu. He claims that Israel is deeply worried about the civilian population, worried about the children, and that Israel is not blocking humanitarian aid at all. Not at all. Well, it turns out that the United Nations and virtually every other humanitarian group involved in the humanitarian disaster in Gaza strongly disagrees with Mr. Netanyahu. Now, we can trust the words of a prime minister under criminal indictment in Israel, or we can trust the people whose function in life is to provide humanitarian aid. UN Secretary General says that much more aid is urgently needed to, quote, to avert an entirely preventable human-made famine, end quote, and that there is no alternative to the massive use of land routes, end quote. The head of the World Food Program said of Gaza that, quote, there is famine, full-blown famine in the north, and it is moving way south, end quote. A month ago, more than 50 humanitarian organizations called on Israel to allow greater humanitarian access and stop unnecessarily restricting aid. That's 50 humanitarian organizations. Mr. Netanyahu says one thing, but 50 organizations who are desperately trying to get food to hungry people say something else, and let the world decide who is telling the truth. Mr. President, anti-Semitism is a vile and disgusting form of bigotry that has done unspeakable harm to many millions of people for hundreds of years, including my own family, I might add. But it is outrageous and it is disgraceful to use the charge of anti-Semitism to distract us from the immoral and illegal war policies that Netanyahu's extremist and racist government is pursuing. But, Mr. President, how can or how will the United States be able to criticize any country in the world, whether it is Russia, China, Saudi Arabia, or anyone else, any other country in the world, if we pretend that what is happening in Gaza, if we actually believe what Netanyahu is saying? If we turn our backs and ignore the crimes against humanity that are being committed in Gaza right now, what credibility will we ever have in criticizing the actions of any country, no matter how terrible those actions may be? To the best of my knowledge, however, tomorrow will be unique in bringing Prime Minister Netanyahu to address a joint meeting of Congress. It will be the first time in American history that a war criminal has been given that honor. Frankly, this invitation to Netanyahu is a disgrace and something that we will look back on with regret. Madam President, I think we all agree that Israel had the right to defend itself against the horrific Hamas attack on October 7th. But Netanyahu's extreme right-wing government has, since that attack, waged what amounts to a total war against the entire Palestinian people, making life unlivable in Gaza and killing tens of thousands. These actions have trampled on international law, on American law, and on basic human values. It is absolutely irresponsible for us to turn our backs on one of the worst humanitarian disasters in modern history, especially when that disaster has been aided and abetted by U.S. taxpayer dollars and weapons. In other words, it's not just the Israeli government, it is us and our money and our weaponry as well. Since this war began, among a population of 2.2 million people, at least 39,000 Palestinians have been killed and 89,000 injured. 60% of whom are women, children, or elderly people. Most observers believe that the death toll is much higher because thousands of people remain buried under the mountains of rubble. Their bodies have not yet been recovered. Madam President, some 1.9 million people out of a population of 2.2 million have been driven from their homes. 90% of the population. Take a deep breath. 90% of the population driven from their homes. The vast majority of these desperate and poor people have now been displaced not once, not twice, but in some cases 4 or 5 times, herded around like cattle. Just yesterday, Israel announced another evacuation order for Khan Yunis, and 150,000 people were forced to flee on a moment's notice. Madam President, when we talk about housing in Gaza, it's not just that people have been displaced time and time again. More than 60% of Gaza's housing has been damaged or destroyed, including 221,000 housing units that have been completely destroyed. Where are these people going to go to if and when this war ever ends? And with that housing destruction, more than 1 million people remain permanently homeless. Entire neighborhoods have been wiped out. Today, more than 1 million Palestinians, almost half of the population of Gaza, are living in tents, trying to find shelter, trying to find protection from the intense summer heat in that area. But, Madam President, it is not just the housing that has been destroyed. Gaza's civilian infrastructure has also been devastated. Water and sewage systems have been made inoperable, and the result, raw sewage is running through the streets of Gaza, spreading disease, and there is very little clean water. Many roads are impassable, and there is virtually no electricity now in Gaza. But it's not just the housing that's been destroyed, not just the infrastructure that has been destroyed. Madam President, Gaza had 12 universities, schools of higher learning. Every single one of those universities has been bombed. And 88% of all school buildings have been damaged. In other words, under Mr. Netanyahu's leadership, the entire educational system in Gaza has been annihilated. In fact, 540 people have been killed while sheltering in UN schools. But, Madam President, it's not just the housing that's been destroyed, not just the infrastructure of Gaza that has been destroyed, not just the educational system which has been destroyed. At a time when almost 90,000 people are dealing with war-related injuries in Gaza, including many, many children who have lost their arms and their legs, who are suffering all kinds of diseases. The healthcare system in Gaza has been systematically obliterated. 21 of Gaza's 36 hospitals are completely out of service, and the remainder can only partially function. The World Health Organization has recorded more than 1,000 attacks on healthcare facilities since October 7th. As a result, disease is spreading due to shortages of clean water, sanitation, and hygiene. Cases of hepatitis, dysentery, and other infections are on the rise, and cases of polio have now been detected. Malnourished women struggle to breastfeed their newborns. Formula is inaccessible, and even when available, cannot be used without reliable sources of clean water. So the tiniest children and their mothers suffer as well. But, Madam President, it's not just the displacement of 1.9 million people. It's not just the mass destruction of housing. It's not just the obliteration of the infrastructure. It's not just the destruction of the educational system. It's not just the annihilation of the healthcare system in Gaza that we are seeing. It is even worse than that. And I hope that my colleagues who attend Mr. Netanyahu's remarks on Wednesday remember this as they rise time and time again to give him standing ovations. As a result of Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid, people in Gaza are now starving to death. So remember, when people stand up and applaud, children, women, innocent people in Gaza are now starving to death. According to the best available research, drawing on leading experts from the UN and other aid organizations around the world, some 495,000 Palestinians face starvation. These groups estimate that more than 50,000 children require treatment for acute malnutrition and are at risk of starving to death. At least 30 documented, and I suspect it's a lot higher number than that, have already starved to death. So when you stand up and applaud that guy, remember the starving children that he has created. But even those who get the life-saving care they need, children, will carry the scars of this disaster for the rest of their lives. As every psychologist will tell you, a child's brain develops fastest in the first 2 years of life, and childhood malnutrition does lifelong cognitive and physical damage. That is what Netanyahu is doing to the children of Gaza. And I would ask my colleagues to stop for a moment and also think about the psychological damage this war has done to the children there. Imagine being a child living with the constant buzzing of drones above your head, wondering whether those drones are going to rain fire and bullets onto your home, wondering if they might strike you at any moment. Imagine being a little 5-year-old, witnessing your relatives killed, your neighborhood destroyed. Think about being a 10-year-old, going hungry night after night and searching around for water and for food to survive. Think about being pushed from one place to another, not knowing where you'll be tomorrow, carrying your little belongings, your few belongings through streets, running with sewage and amid piles of rubble and trash. That is what Mr. Netanyahu, the man Congress is honoring tomorrow, has done to the children of Gaza.